this ended up being a little bit of a story about how much I'm drawn by art direction. Also, I really have to talk about this masterpiece, as somehow somebody just landed around here. Just so we're clear, this is not a review of any sort, this is just a huge blabber. In a recent, very calm afternoon, I was sitting in front of my computer, working on a couple of stuff, minding my own business, when suddenly something kind of clicked. The first video I've ever made was this one titled I Like Dragon Maid, a video I made because I was looking for some kind of outlet for me to just blabber about how special that show is to me, and despite how appalling that video is in terms of quality, I don't know what I was trying to accomplish with this. My feelings towards the show haven't changed much since then. Whenever I'm feeling down, it is a show that I know I can just open up Crunchyroll and sit down to, and it will lift up my spirit, even if just a little bit, for a very brief moment. And I'm really glad that I have this safe spot that has been serving pretty much the same purpose ever since I was but a teenager in high school back in 2019. Point is, for some reason I didn't really talk about this in that video, but something that really implements how I feel towards Dragon Maid is its original soundtrack, which of course is usually a core element of the package of the whole experience. The OST is pretty good and fitting to the show, and it figures as much. Many songs were composed by Ito Masumi. She's a singer and songwriter who has worked on the soundtrack of many shows out there, of which I happen to have some emotional bonds with. One day I may or may not make a video just about them, or if I don't, if I keep making stuff, these things will probably be mentioned in different videos anyway. But for instance, she worked on a composition of many tracks for Dragon Maid. She worked on the OST for Humanity Has Declined. She is the one singing that beautiful, gorgeous masterpiece called Yume no Naka no Watashi no Yume, the ending theme for Humanity Has Declined. She is part of Orange and Lemons and sang the themes for Azumanga. She worked on the OST for the beautiful Haibane Renmei, where she's also responsible for another gift bestowed upon us, Blue Flow, the ending theme of the show. So yeah, the Dragon Maid OST is great, figures as much, but Ito Masumi is actually not the one I was intended to talk about. So let's go back to that calm afternoon I was talking about earlier. I was just working on a document when suddenly this song from the Dragon Maid OST called Oyasumi Matashita simply started playing in my little belfry up here, for reasons yet to be made sense of. Regardless, I decided I wanted to take a listen to the Dragon Maid's OST again, so usual procedure, I fired up Spotify and looked for the OST playlist, aiming specifically to start with Oyasumi Matashita. I found the song and I paid attention to the fact that the track is under the name of this artist named Kotoringo. Now I'm gonna say I wasn't familiar with their discography at the time, but they were responsible for Oyasumi Matashita, which is one of my favorite tracks from Dragon Maid. It's a very calm song that, I guess, makes me get in contact with my inner self, if you will. Brace yourselves, because this is gonna sound poetic, but it kind of makes me feel like I am alone at an apartment's balcony stargazing, which is something I do quite often whilst listening to music. So I thought to myself, I am in a kind of a need for this kind of song, and if this Kotoringo made Oyasumi Matashita, they really must know what they're up to, right? Absolutely right. I clicked on her name and opened up a page on Spotify, and because of the numbers, the first thing that catch my eyes was this song called Kanasukute Yarikirenai, and so I gave it a play, and I was stunned. What? Well, it was absolutely beautiful, and I highly recommend checking out her works. It's amazing. And for a matter of curiosity, I later discovered that this is a cover of a song released in 1968 by this band called the Folk Crusaders, of whom I'd never heard of before. But now I have. We're not done exploring though. I noticed that that song, alongside most of the most popular tracks on that page, were named under an album with a very comforting art cover named Eiga Kono Sekai no Katasumi ni Sarani Ikutsumo no Soundtrack, which translates to a couple more tracks to the film In a Corner of This World. Alright, so you're telling me that there's a film with this art style, with this beautiful track, and even a couple more added to it, and I've never heard of it before. What are you on about? I know a very small percentage of humanity would like to point their plastic fingers stating how I'm about 8 years late to the party, but no one should ever fall for something with such gatekeeping behavior comorbidity such as a comment of that caliber. Better late than never. By the way, have you yet stopped to ponder about the fact that 2016 was whopping 8 years ago now? Lord! I found out there's even a live-action adaptation, which I honestly didn't even bother checking into, because it may be me misjudging, but live-action adaptation of this kind of content can rarely be trusted. I'm not investing to find that one out. So I went to My Anime List, which, by the way, I never go to My Anime List to join into clubs or join into discussions, write reviews, and that kind of thing. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but God forbid, if you allow me to put it like that. But I just like keeping tracks of things I do, and over the years I've stumbled upon different shows and thought to myself, well, this looks pretty interesting, I might check it out later, and they have piled up on my plan to watch list. So from time to time I stumble upon something and think the same, well, this looks pretty interesting, I might check it out later, then look it up on My Anime List to figure it was already on my plan to watch list. I just didn't remember it was there. But it wasn't the case for the film In This Corner of the World. I really just had never seen or heard about it before. But it doesn't matter, I was already sold. I decided to dive into the pond without tipping my toes first. I didn't watch any trailers, I didn't read any synopsis, not that I do that too often anyway. All I had on my hands was a singular track and a box art. I went on fully blind, and that was probably one of the best decisions I could have had at that time. And that's the story about how a seemingly random thought whilst I was working on a completely unrelated document made me find one of the best anime films I've ever watched. From this point on, I want to talk about the film. Now, there won't be any spoilers in this video, I really just want to talk about the direction of the film and other things I find interesting about how the film is conducted. But I also think that going fully blind into things can be a very cool experience, so if you want to do that, I advise you to stop the video here and give the film a try. But if you don't care about that, it's fine, this is spoiler free. Much like with music, not completely, but I usually avoid sticking too much to the concept of genres, because many pieces of art have so many different elements to them that it becomes pretty hard and at times even unfair to fit them into a single specific category. Genres are a concept we created so it becomes easier to sort things out, so of course they serve a great purpose, but sometimes they're either too vague or just not broad enough to a piece of art to fit into. I know that what I'm about to say now is probably going to be a very unnecessary tangent, probably already got my point across, but I don't care. A good example that comes to mind about this is Tally Hall. I'm not gonna say that they reinvented music or anything like that, but they have some good songs. If you don't know them, to get a better understanding, I recommend checking out the songs The Bidding, Ruler of Everything, and Banana Man, which in my opinion these are their best tracks, and that's probably a very cold take. Now, to my knowledge, they're primarily labeled under the indie category, which, in case you don't know, indie music is defined by you not really having a genre to label your song, but rather you have a bunch of different musical influences put together into a song, which is a very interesting concept that has everything to do with what I'm talking about here. But at the same time, following this definition, you could maybe say that a band like Polyphia is an indie band. You see what I mean? Now, the exposure I got to music that is quote-unquote officially labeled under indie music makes me feel like this genre isn't really my cup of tea. But if I play along with this definition, my take on Polyphia is that New Levels, New Devils is their best album, filled to the brim with bangers. Now, if you go to Tally Hall's Wikipedia page, for instance, you'll see that their music is labeled under alternative rock, indie pop, progressive pop, power pop, hip-hop, and according to the story I'm reading here, apparently back then they made up the name Wonky Rock to label themselves under, and they started to define their music as Fablu, another term they made up because the media started to refer to them as a wonky rock band. And I remember the first time I read this story, I felt like they were just trying really hard to be as quirky as they could and to just not fit in for a matter of exceptionalism, I guess. But today I like to interpret this as a way they found to express how they think that the label your music falls under shouldn't really matter much. I am very aware that that's probably not that deep, but I myself am a daydream believer. It's kind of like when you stop to think about how were classical music defined before they became classical. I got distracted. That was a little bit of a detour, and the point I was trying to get to before all this pish-posh was I am not really a huge fan of these slice of life genre. I don't really like a moe blob thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like most of the shows that fit into this category are mumble jumble of anime tropes put together into a pile of boredom. But I do have exceptions for that. Shows that I think are very creative on how they deliver their comedy, like Joshiraku, Azumanga, or shows that I feel that carefully try to tell me something whilst keeping a light atmosphere, like Dragon Maid, because I honestly think that with the right amount of care and creativity, you can make a banger out of almost any concept, and something cool is that this is all very subjective. But the thing with the film in this corner of the world is that maybe you could try to fit a good chunk of the film into the slice of life category, but it wasn't so much of a choice of genre, but rather a choice of narrative style. I'll try to explain what I mean by that. This is a historical film, so it's set on a canonical time of our history around the 30s and the 40s, and we see this world through the eyes of our protagonist, Urano Suzu, a girl native to the town of Hiroshima. If you didn't miss your history classes, you know we're talking about the atomic bombs, the first one being deployed on 6th of August of 1945. Now I'm stating the specific date here because of the interesting way the film conducts its plot. Although the bomb and the war itself isn't what this film is all about. As I said earlier, I went in blind, but I already knew beforehand it was a historical tale. I just didn't know the specific time until the film showed a calendar for the first time. I think it was around the early 30s, I can't recall, but I remember that the first thought I had when I saw that calendar for the first time was, that's pretty near the war, isn't it? But the most interesting to me is that I didn't give it much thought. For one, I didn't know the plot would be developed across time skips before the first time skip, but most importantly, the film doesn't drive itself into chaos from the get-go. So much so that, as I went in blind, before the first time skip, I thought about the war, but I was thinking more about how cute it was to see these young people talking like the elderly, which, of course, given the time, and that the film would potentially be a very light experience, maybe following a path similar to works of the likes of My Neighbor Totoro, or Ponyo, if you will. Because, for the most part, this film is really good at carefully driving yours, but most importantly, the character's attention away from all this disaster, because focusing on sadness and desperation and chaos alone isn't what this film is trying to do. What it does instead is show you a specific date whenever there's a time skip, as the situation gradually gets violent, and from paying attention to those dates, you notice the elephant in the room. But it isn't addressed for a good chunk of the film, because at the same time that the film is portraying sadness and desperation and chaos, it isn't portraying hopelessness. We'll get to that. The attention is driven away from chaos in a couple of interesting ways. Throughout the course of it, the characters run into many problems or situations that potentially could become problematic on the long run, some related to the war and some not. But the film doesn't take many of those problems seriously, at the same time that they're there building the characters and showing you how they interact with each other and with the world around them. And I know how obvious this sounds, but showing their humanity, how normal they are. All their interactions are very natural and organic, and this is very important. Also, drawings. The main character is an artist. She draws landscapes and portraits, and her sketchbook in her right hand are a great symbol of how art is a language that allows us to express our interpretation of the world, or to take a peek at all sorts of different sides of it and interpret them in our own way. So much so that, not only related to that, but down the line, as the situation gradually gets worse, something happens, and if you couldn't notice yet, the film draws a line making it very clear that this is not a joke. This is war. But although this is war, this isn't a military or political film. This is a film about humanity, about love. It's a film showing the daily lives of innocent people who didn't have anything to do with what was happening. It's a film that wants to tell us that despite how cruel this world can be, it can also be beautiful, always showing a glimpse of hope for a better future amidst all this chaos. Which is an interesting statement that can drive us to the theme of the film, the song I mentioned earlier, Kanasukute Yarikirenai, which translates to I am so sad I can't make it. But the song doesn't sound sad. I showed it to a cousin of mine who hadn't watched the film, and they said the song sounds nostalgic, especially because of this sound. And that's very interesting, because the song talks about staring at the sky and feeling like crying, and this sad feeling of emptiness without ever expressing why, but always with a very comforting tone. And what is nostalgia if not a very happy, sweet memory that makes you feel so sad and empty without being able to express why, but deep inside you know you'll never be able to experience that anymore. Quick parenthesis. Now, back when Oppenheimer was released last year, which, by the way, I watched it at the theaters and I thought it was an incredible film, I remember there was a whole commotion about its release in Japan because many critics were saying the film was insensitive towards a Japanese audience, which is a comprehensible take given how undeniably sensitive this topic is, regardless of who you are. And there's a similar criticism you could give on In This Corner of the World, which is the film turning a blind eye to the atrocities committed by the Japanese during World War II, which is a take I can also see where it comes from, again, given how undeniably sensitive this topic is, regardless of who you are. But from my perspective, none of these films are about the bomb and the war itself. I'm not trying to compare these two films, the only thing they have in common is that they both revolve around the same historical event, but they have nothing to do with each other. But in the way I see, none of them are trying to defend or offend any side, because this should be at the very least obvious enough, but there is no right side to any of this. War sucks to everyone. And I think these two films are great examples of how art can also serve as a window for us to look at the past and not commit these mistakes again. I like how fitting the title of the film is. When we learn about these terrible chapters of our history, the victims are often shown to us as statistics, as numbers. And many of us are privileged enough to be thankful that we don't experience these events. What this film is doing is not looking at the victims as numbers, but humanizing them, trying to imagine a scenario to show us at least a glimpse of what was happening at that time, at that corner of the world. Hello, I am a little too curious for my own good, and I accidentally ended up finding something very interesting, and I want to share it. This is gonna make more sense if you already watched the film, but if you haven't, it's fine. This is Japan, I believe you can tell that. If you zoom down here, this is Hiroshima, and a bit further away, this is Kure. Now if you zoom in around these mountains around here, you'll find Suzusanchi, and if you drag the doll around here, if you will. So if you drag the doll all the way down here, you'll be greeted by a sign and you'll find this house. And here it says, Suzu's residence. Hello, welcome to the Kaminaganoki number 808, the Hojo residence. If you wonder why this place was said to be the Hojo residence, this is because Kono Fumio has once lived here. Here, the sun takes longer to rise and sometimes you oversleep, but the sunset always shines through. It'd be nice if life could also be like that. This video is done. Thank you for watching until this point. For whoever cares and maybe for my future self, I want to quickly talk about a couple things. A while back, I made a video on a whim, barely scripted, titled Wording Some Thoughts. And about 800 and such people decided it was an interesting idea to click on it, and even some of them went out of their way to write some very sweet and interesting comments. You caught me off guard, but thank you for that. A while back, I did a purge in my channel. I removed some of the few videos I had uploaded here. I even went as far as straight up deleting some of them. Most of it out of pure shame, but looking back I regret doing that because I had a lot of fun making them. But what's deleted is deleted. It's uploaded in some cloud out there, but I can't really do anything about it. But something I've done a couple times was I would post a video kind of like this one, and then I would not post anything for months and maybe sporadically post a random gameplay of something, which is something I'm not doing anymore, by the way. But I do want to say that I have some ideas I've been brewing in my little Gudua. Some ideas I've thought out. One of them is already recorded even, but it will take a good while for me to turn them into a video if I ever do. At around June of 2023, I started working on a video about a banger of a manga called Shiori Experience, and there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about revolving it. And I've also been considering making a video about the French language, which is something that I've been getting super into recently. I've recently started to make an effort for it to maybe become my fourth language one day. So I've been prone on working on these two projects, but I still don't know if I'll make anything out of these ideas. I guess we'll see. But if I do, it's gonna take a while. With that said, thanks for watching. Bye.